James Miller's farm is failing. The bank wants his land, and the bills keep piling up. But James has never lost his kindness, even when he barely has enough to feed himself. One stormy night, he hears whimpering coming from his flooded creek. Without thinking twice, he wades into the dangerous waters to save a litter of drowning puppies. He doesn't know these puppies belong to Claire Harrison, a lonely billionaire who's lost faith in humanity. As James nurses the puppies back to health in his simple farmhouse, Claire searches desperately for her missing pets. But will these two worlds collide in ways neither of them could ever imagine? The leather-bound ledger sat open on James Miller's kitchen table, its pages worn soft from years of worried fingers. In the pre-dawn darkness, he hunched over the book, squinting at columns of numbers that refused to add up differently, no matter how many times he checked them. The strong coffee beside him had grown cold, forgotten in his concentration. Outside, a rooster crowed into the autumn chill. James straightened his tired back and ran a calloused hand through his graying hair. At 45, he felt twice his age some mornings. The ledger told a story he knew by heart, 6 months behind on the mortgage, equipment repairs eating through what little savings remained. And now Tommy, his last farmhand, needed his overdue wages. The old farmhouse creaked around him as he rose, his boots heavy on the wooden floors his grandfather had laid, 3rd generation on this land, and he might be the one to lose it. The thought burned worse than the coffee he finally swallowed. Dawn painted the kitchen window in soft pinks and golds as James pulled on his worn jacket. The fertile soil of Miller Farm stretched out before him, 160 acres of hope and heartbreak. Winter wheat sprouted in neat rows, though not as thick as it should be. He hadn't been able to afford the proper amount of fertilizer this season. "Morning, old girl," he called to Martha, the ancient barn cat who appeared at his feet. She'd been his only consistent companion since Sarah passed 5 years ago. The cat wound between his legs as he made his way to the barn, her purr a familiar comfort. Tommy was already there, shifting nervously from foot to foot. The young man had worked the farm for 3 years, showing up fresh out of high school, with more enthusiasm than experience. James had taught him everything he knew, just as his father had taught him. "Mr. Miller," Tommy started, his face pinched with worry. "I hate to do this, but—" James held up a hand. "I know, son. You've got a baby on the way. You need steady pay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not all I owe you, but it's what I could scrape together. Should cover 2 weeks." Tommy's eyes welled up as he took the envelope. "I'd stay if I could, sir. You've been like a father to me." "You take care of your family first," James said firmly, though his heart ached. "That's what matters." After Tommy left, James threw himself into the morning chores with fierce determination. The work hadn't changed in all his years. Feed the few remaining cattle, check the irrigation system, repair what he could with baling wire and determination. But now he did it alone, every task taking twice as long without help. At 10 o'clock, right on schedule, a sleek black car pulled up his dusty driveway. James wiped his hands on his jeans and steeled himself for what was coming. Marcus Webb, the local bank manager, stepped out in his polished shoes and crisp suit, looking as out of place as a peacock in a chicken coop. "James," Marcus nodded, his discomfort evident. They'd gone to high school together, played on the same baseball team. Now they met monthly over past due notices and declining options. "Let's talk inside," James said, leading the way to his kitchen. The ledger still lay open, a testament to his morning's futile calculations. Marcus settled into a chair, declining the offered coffee. "James, I've bought you as much time as I can. The regional office is breathing down my neck. They want movement on this property." "The winter wheat's coming in strong," James argued, knowing it wasn't enough. "Give me until harvest." "You said that about the summer corn," Marcus interrupted gently, "and the spring soybeans before that. Even with perfect weather and record yields, the numbers just don't work anymore. Small farms like yours, they're You're dying out, James. The big operations can produce more for less. James stared at his hands, rough and scarred from decades of honest work. This land's been in my family for 70 years, Marcus. My grandfather cleared it himself. My father developed the irrigation system. I was born in that room upstairs. My Sarah, his voice caught. She's buried under the oak tree out back. Marcus's face softened with genuine sympathy. I know. That's why I'm here personally, instead of sending a letter. You've got 3 months, James. After that, the bank has to move forward with foreclosure. Maybe it's time to consider selling. There's a development group interested in the whole valley. You could get enough to start fresh somewhere. Else, James shook his head. Starting fresh somewhere else wasn't an option. This land wasn't just property. It was his heritage, his history, his home. Every tree, every fence post, every acre held memories he couldn't bear to leave behind. After Marcus left, James sat alone at his kitchen table, the ledger's damning numbers staring back at him. Martha jumped into his lap, her warmth a small comfort against the cold reality of his situation. 3 months, 90 days to perform. A miracle or lose everything. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. James closed the ledger and stood up. Storm or no storm, the farm wouldn't work itself. He had chores to finish, and he'd face tomorrow's problems tomorrow. As he stepped back, outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, but James Miller walked straight toward them. It wasn't the first storm he'd weathered, and if he had anything to say about it, it wouldn't be his last. 60 floors above Manhattan, Claire Harrison stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city sparkle like scattered diamonds in the evening light. In her reflection, she could see the leather-bound photo album lying open on her white marble coffee table, its recent pages conspicuously empty. The sound of puppies playing made her turn. 5 golden retriever puppies tumbled over each other on her imported silk rug, their joy in stark contrast to the sterile perfection of her penthouse. They were barely 8 weeks old, the last litter, from her beloved Daisy, who had passed away shortly after giving birth. Claire had bottle-fed them herself, refusing to let servants handle the task. They were all she had left of Daisy, and more importantly, they were the only beings in her life that didn't want anything from her except love. Miss Harrison, her assistant's voice came through the intercom. The benefit committee is waiting for your decision on the table settings. Claire sighed, running her fingers through her elegant grey bob. At 52, she had earned every silver strand and fine line, building Harrison Technologies from a startup to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Tell them whatever they choose is fine. But Miss Harrison, you specifically said, I said it's fine, Rebecca. Claire's tone ended the conversation. She moved to her sofa, and immediately the puppies swarmed her, tiny paws leaving marks. On her designer slacks, she didn't care. The photo album caught her eye again. The first half was filled with memories. Her parents at their lake house, Claire graduating from MIT, the early days of the company. Then came the society pages. Claire at galas, at charity events, at board meetings. The people around her changed in every photo, fair-weather friends and opportunistic suitors, blending into a meaningless blur of fake smiles and hidden agendas. The last filled page showed Daisy, her warm brown eyes full of unconditional love. After that, nothing but blank pages. Claire hadn't bothered taking photos at events anymore. What was the point? They were all the same, and none of them real. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Richard Whitman, her latest suitor. He was handsome, wealthy, and completely predictable in his pursuit of her. His messages always came after his hedge fund's trading hours, as regularly as a market close. One of the puppies, the smallest female she'd named Hope, crawled into her lap and yawned. Claire scratched behind her ears, smiling as the puppy's eyes drooped with contentment. At least you're honest about what you want, she murmured. The Idea had been forming for weeks, and now it crystallized. She needed a break. Her country estate in Vermont, a property she'd bought years ago but rarely visited, would be perfect. The puppies could have space to run, and she could have room to breathe without the constant pressure of being Claire Harrison, billionaire CEO. "Rebecca," she called through the intercom, "cancel my appointments for the next 2 weeks, and have Thomas bring the car around tomorrow morning. We're going to Vermont. But Ms. Harrison, the board meeting can be handled virtually. That's why we make technology, isn't it?" For the first time in weeks, Claire felt lighter. The puppies seemed to sense her mood, their playful energy increasing as they romped around her legs. She moved to her bedroom to pack, the puppies trailing behind her like a furry parade. The forecast showed storms moving up the coast, but she didn't care. A little rain seemed like a small price to pay for escape. Besides, she thought, looking at her reflection in the massive mirror, sometimes the best changes came after storms. The old Ford tractor groaned as James guided it across his fields, its rusted body a testament to years of faithful service. Dark clouds roiled overhead, their bellies heavy with rain. The local weather service had upgraded their advisory to a severe storm warning, and James could feel it in his bones. This wasn't going to be an ordinary rainfall. He'd spent the morning securing anything that could blow away, his father's voice echoing in his memory. Nature gives and nature takes, but she takes more if you're not prepared. The hay bales were covered, the remaining cattle moved to the reinforced barn, and now he was making one final check of the drainage ditches that kept his lower fields from flooding. The wind picked up, bending the winter wheat. A fork of lightning split the sky, followed by a rumble that shook the tractors. "Frame," James patted the steering wheel. "Just hold together a little longer, old girl." 50 miles away, Claire's driver Thomas navigated her luxury SUV along the winding Vermont roads. The puppies dozed in their special travel carriers, occasionally whimpering as thunder boomed outside. Claire had insisted on bringing them, rather than having them transported separately. "They're family, Thomas," she had said firmly. "We traveled together." The rain started as a gentle patter, but quickly intensified. Water sluiced across the windshield faster than the wipers could handle. Thomas leaned forward, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Miss Harrison, perhaps we should find somewhere to wait out the storm." Claire checked her phone. No signal. They were in a rural dead zone, surrounded by farmland and forest. "The GPS shows a town about 15 miles ahead. We can stop there if needed." A flash of lightning illuminated the entire landscape, and in that brief, brilliant moment, Claire saw how the rain had transformed the gentle countryside into something treacherous. The ditches along the road overflowed, and small streams had formed across the pavement. Back on his farm, James rushed to finish his preparations. The creek that ran through his property was rising rapidly, threatening to breach its banks. He'd seen floods before, but the water was rising faster than usual, churning brown and angry. The first serious gust of wind nearly knocked him off his feet as he made his way back to the house. Martha waited on the porch, her tail puffed up in alarm. "Inside, old girl," he called, holding the door open. "This isn't a night to be out." The storm's fury increased with each passing minute. James moved through his house, checking windows and setting out candles in case the power failed. The wind howled through every crack and crevice, making the old farmhouse creak and groan. On the rural highway, Thomas struggled to keep Claire's SUV on the road. The storm had turned the late afternoon dark as twilight, and fallen branches littered their path. They were crawling along at 20 miles per hour when it happened. A massive gust of wind combined with a deep puddle sent the vehicle hydroplaning. "Hold on!" Thomas shouted, fighting the steering wheel. But physics was physics, and nearly 3 tons of luxury vehicle became a deadly projectile. They spun once, twice, the world becoming a blur of rain and motion. Claire felt weightless for a moment before impact. The SUV slid sideways off the road, rolling once before coming to rest against a fence. The airbags deployed in a cloud of powder and noise. Through the chaos, she heard the terrified yelps of her puppies. "Thomas! Thomas!" She turned to her driver, who was slumped against his airbag, breathing but unconscious. The puppies continued to cry in the back. Claire could smell gasoline. With shaking hands, she unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to check the carriers. To her horror, she saw that the impact had broken them open. As she watched, helpless, the frightened puppies scrambled through the broken rear window and into the storm. "No! Come back!" She tried to open her door, but it was jammed. Through the cracked windshield, she could barely make out her puppies' shapes disappearing into the rain, heading toward what looked like a swollen creek. The last thing Claire saw before losing consciousness was the dark silhouette of a farmhouse. In the distance, its porch light a lonely beacon in the storm. James was about to settle in for the night when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the storm's fury. He lowered his coffee cup and listened harder. There it came again, high-pitched whimpering, desperate and afraid. Carried on the wind, he grabbed his heavy raincoat and flashlight, then paused at the mudroom door. On a hook hung his father's old rope, its fibers worn smooth from decades of use. John Miller had used that rope for everything from hauling equipment to rescuing stranded cattle during floods. "Always keep good rope handy," he'd told James. "You never know when something precious needs saving." James grabbed it, looping it across his chest. The rain hit him like needles as he stepped outside, the wind trying to tear his coat open. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, dancing across the flooded landscape. The whimpering grew louder as he approached the creek, now a raging torrent that had swallowed its banks. Then he saw them, 5 golden retriever puppies trapped on a small island of land that was rapidly disappearing under the rising water. They must have been swept downstream to this spot, where a fallen tree had created a temporary haven. But the water was rising fast, and the current looked strong enough to sweep away a grown man. "Hold on, little ones," James called out, though his voice was nearly lost in the storm. He played his flashlight across the scene, assessing options. The fallen tree created a partial bridge, but its trunk was slick with rain and moss. The creek bed had turned into a deadly channel of swirling brown water. One of the puppies lost its footing, tiny paws scrabbling at the muddy earth. Its terrified yelp spurred James into action. He tied one end of his father's rope to the sturdiest nearby tree, tested it with his full weight, then began making his way across the fallen trunk. The bark was treacherous under his boots. Halfway across, he slipped, catching himself just in time. The puppies watched him, their eyes reflecting his flashlight beam, their bodies huddled together against the rain. 20 feet of churning water separated him from the puppies. The rope around his chest felt like his father's steadying hand. Taking a deep breath, James eased himself into the water. The current hit him like a freight train, trying to tear him away. Every step was a battle, the creek bed uneven and shifting beneath his feet. The cold seeped through his clothes, numbing his limbs. But he kept moving, letting the rope take his weight when the current grew too strong. "Almost there," he grunted, though whether he was talking to himself or the puppies, he wasn't sure. The smallest one whimpered and took a step toward him, only to be pulled back by its siblings. 15 feet, 10 feet, 5. The water was up, to his chest now, threatening to lift him off his feet entirely. One wrong step and he'd be swept away, father's rope or not. A massive surge of water hit him from behind. James lost his footing, going under for a heart-stopping moment. The world became a cold, dark blur. His fingers found the rope, gripping it like a lifeline. He pulled himself up, gasping. The puppy's island was barely visible now, more water than earth. As James watched in horror, the ground beneath them began to crumble. "No!" With strength born of desperation, he lunged forward. The current tried to pull him under again, but the rope held true. His hands found solid ground, and he pulled himself onto what remained of the island. The puppies swarmed him immediately, wet fur and frightened whimpers. James shrugged off his coat, creating a makeshift sling. One by one, he tucked the puppies inside, securing them against his chest. They huddled there, shivering but trusting. The journey back was even harder. The current had strengthened, and now he carried precious cargo. Every step was a negotiation between balance and safety. The rope that had guided him out now became their lifeline back. "Dad," James whispered through clenched teeth, "if you're watching, a little help here would be appreciated." Whether it was divine intervention or simply determined perseverance, he felt new strength flow through his tired muscles. Step by treacherous step, he made his way back to solid ground. By the time he reached the bank, his arms were shaking from cold and effort. The puppies squirmed against him, 5 heartbeats strong and alive. James didn't stop until he reached his house, practically falling through the door. Martha greeted him with an alarmed yowl as he gently set the puppies down in his kitchen. They stumbled out of his coat, water pooling on the worn linoleum. "Let's get you dried off," he said softly, grabbing clean towels from the linen closet. As he dried each puppy, checking for injuries, he couldn't help but wonder where they'd come from. They were too well-bred to be strays. Their golden coats and gentle manners spoke of careful breeding. The smallest puppy licked his hand as he dried behind its ears, and James felt something in his heart shift. These puppies needed him. And right now, that was enough. The mystery of their origins could wait until morning. Outside, his father's rope hung dripping by the door, its fibers holding stories of one more precious thing saved. Claire awoke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of clean sheets. For a moment, she was disoriented. This wasn't her penthouse, wasn't her bed. Then memory crashed back. The storm, the accident, the puppies disappearing. Into the darkness. She sat up too quickly, making the room spin. A nurse appeared almost immediately, gentle hands easing her back against the pillows. "Miss Harrison, you need to rest. You've had a concussion." "My puppies!" Claire's voice was hoarse. "Has anyone found my puppies?" "The local police and animal control have been searching since dawn," the nurse assured her. "Your assistant has been coordinating everything." As if summoned, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. She looked as polished as ever, though concern creased her forehead. "Miss Harrison, thank goodness you're awake. Thomas is stable, minor injuries only. I've already contacted our legal team about the accident and—" "The puppies," Claire interrupted. "What about my puppies?" Rebecca's professional demeanor faltered. We haven't found them yet. The storm made searching difficult, and that area is mostly farmland. I've had posters made." She pulled out a glossy printed page. Claire took the poster with trembling hands. 5 smiling puppy faces looked back at her, photographed just days ago in her penthouse. The reward offered was more money than most people made in a year, but the number felt meaningless. What was money compared to those trusting eyes, those wagging tails? "Double it," Claire ordered, her voice stronger now. "Triple it if needed. Contact every veterinary clinic, animal shelter, and farm within 50 miles. I want search teams out there as soon as the weather clears." "Miss Harrison," Rebecca began cautiously, "the doctors want you to stay for observation." "Then observe me organizing a search." Claire swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the wave of dizziness. "Get me my clothes and find out who owns the property near where we crashed." The local media picked up the story almost immediately. "Billionaire CEO offers fortune for lost puppies." Claire didn't care about the headlines or the speculation. About her mental state. Let them think she was eccentric. She knew what mattered. By afternoon, her hospital room had become a command center. Maps covered every surface, marked with search grids and reported sightings. Her phone rang constantly with tips, each one raising her hopes only to dash them again. The storm flooded most of the creek beds in the area, the local search and rescue coordinator explained, pointing to the map. "If they were caught in the current—" "They're alive," Claire said firmly. She could feel it. Hope, the runt of the litter who always cuddled closest, wouldn't give up. Neither would her siblings. Neither would Claire. As evening approached, she stood at the hospital window, watching another search team return empty-handed. The poster trembled in her grip, 5 pairs of eyes staring back at her. Somewhere out there, her puppies were lost and afraid. And this thought she clung to, somewhere out there, someone kind had found them and was keeping them safe. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "I'm coming," she whispered to the darkening sky. "Just hold on. I'm coming." In the pale light of morning, James pulled his grandmother's veterinary manual from the highest kitchen shelf, carefully wiping decades of dust from its leather cover. Eleanor Miller had been one of the first female veterinarians in the county, practicing well into her 70s. The book was filled with her neat handwriting in the margins, observations and remedies accumulated over a lifetime of caring for animals. "Let's see what Grandma Eleanor has to say about you little ones," he murmured. The puppies had spent the night in a makeshift bed of old blankets near the wood stove. Now they watched him with bright eyes, their golden fur beginning to fluff. Up as it dried, the smallest one, he'd started thinking of her as tiny, wobbled over to him on unsteady legs. She sneezed, a concerning wet sound that sent him flipping through the manual's pages. His grandmother's familiar handwriting caught his eye. "In young animals, exposure and stress can quickly lead to illness. Watch for lethargy, wet cough, or loss of appetite." As if on cue, Tiny sneezed again. James scooped her up, feeling her slight trembles. The other puppies crowded around his feet, their recovery already more evident. But Tiny felt warm, too warm. "Looks like you and I have a date with Dr. Chen," he told her, tucking the manual into his jacket. The local vet had taken over his grandmother's practice years ago, maintaining the same compassionate approach to both animals and payment plans. The drive into town was slow, his truck carefully navigating roads still strewn with storm debris. Tiny huddled in his lap while her siblings peered out the windows from a box on the passenger seat, their tails wagging at every new sight. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as James walked in with 5 puppies. "James Miller, what have you gotten yourself into?" He explained about the storm rescue while she examined them, starting with Tiny. The old manual lay open on the exam table, his grandmother's notes visible. Dr. Chen smiled at the sight. "Eleanor's Bible. I still refer to it sometimes, you know. She had a way of explaining things that no modern textbook can match." Her expression grew serious as she listened to Tiny's chest. "Early stages of pneumonia, I'm afraid. The others seem healthy, but this little one needs antibiotics and close monitoring." James's heart sank. "I don't suppose you still do payment plans?" Dr. Chen's eyes softened. "Eleanor Miller saved my first horse when I was 10 years old. Wouldn't take a penny from my parents because she said the look on my face was payment enough." She pulled out her prescription pad. "We'll work something out." Back home, James set up a recovery area in the living room, following his grandmother's detailed instructions for caring for sick puppies. Every few hours, he had to give Tiny her medicine, a task that required both patience and determination. "Come on, sweetheart," he coaxed, wrapping her in a towel the way the manual demonstrated. "Your grandma Eleanor would say medicine goes down easier with a spoonful of love." To his surprise, Tiny licked the dropper clean, then snuggled into his chest. The other puppies proved to be excellent nurses, curling around their sister during nap times and sharing their food when she finally showed an appetite. James found himself talking to them as he worked around the farm, carrying Tiny in a sling, made from an old shirt while her siblings romped nearby. "You're going to spoil them," Martha the cat seemed to say, watching from her perch on the porch railing. "Probably," James admitted, scratching Tiny's ears. The manual lay open on the porch swing, turned to a page about recovery signs. His grandmother's notes in the margins read, "The best medicine is often simple attention and care. Animals, like people, heal better when they know they're loved." Looking at the puppies playing in the yard, their golden fur bright in the sunlight, James felt something shift in his heart. The bank's deadline still loomed, the farm's problems hadn't magically disappeared, but somehow these 5 little lives had brought something back to the old house, something that had been missing since Sarah died. His grandmother would have called it hope. Tiny yawned in her sling, her breath warm against his chest. No longer fevered, just contentedly tired. James smiled, remembering his grandmother's favorite saying, written on the manual's first page. Sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us right back. James rarely bothered with the local newspaper anymore. Too many stories about failing farms and urban development. But the bold headline on his doorstep caught his eye. Tech billionaire offers record reward for lost puppies. Below it was a photo of 5 familiar golden faces. His coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. Inside, he could hear the puppies playing, their happy barks carrying through the old farmhouse. The same puppies whose faces now stared up at him from the newspaper's front page. The article told a story that filled in all the blanks. Claire Harrison, CEO of Harrison Technologies, had been in an accident during the storm. Her precious puppies, the last litter of her beloved dog, had escaped into the night. The reward for their safe return was more money than his farm was worth. One of the puppies, not Tiny but her brother he'd taken to calling Rascal, bounded onto the porch, tail wagging. James set down his coffee and picked up the puppy, studying his face against the newspaper photo. There was no doubt. These were Claire Harrison's puppies. The reward money could save his farm. One phone call, and all his problems would be solved. He could pay off the bank, repair the equipment, maybe even hire Tommy back. It was the logical choice, the smart choice. But as he stood there, Rascal licking his chin, James remembered the night of the storm, remembered Tiny's fever, the way they'd all huddled together for warmth, remembered his grandmother's words about the ones we rescue. Inside, he could hear Tiny's distinctive yip as she played with her siblings. She was fully recovered now, racing around the house with as much energy as the others. They'd claimed his living room as their playground, his heart as their home. The newspaper article continued with quotes from Claire Harrison. "They're not just pets," she'd told reporters. "They're family. Money is no object. I just want them back safe." There was a photo of her, too, standing in what looked like a hospital room, maps spread out behind her. Despite her elegant clothes and perfect posture, her eyes held a sadness that James recognized, the look of someone who'd lost part of their heart. He set Rascal down and walked inside, where the other puppies immediately surrounded him. Tiny, as always, claimed his lap as soon as he sat down. The newspaper lay heavy in his hands as he read the article again. The smart thing would be to call. The puppies would go back to a life of luxury, and his farm would be saved. Everyone would win. But James Miller had never done things just because they were smart. His father had called it stubbornness. His grandmother had called it integrity. Looking into Tiny's trusting eyes, he knew he needed time to think. The article mentioned search teams combing the area, working their way systematically across the county. They'd reach his farm eventually. Until then, he had a choice to make. Martha watched from her perch on the windowsill, her green eyes unblinking. "Don't judge me," James told her. "This isn't as simple as it looks." But maybe it was. Claire Harrison's words echoed in his mind. Their family. He understood that. These puppies had become his family too, in the short time he'd had them. The money would save his farm, but at what cost to his soul? He folded the newspaper and set it aside. The puppies needed their morning walk, and the farm needed tending. Big decisions, his grandmother always said, were best made with a clear head and a busy hand. As he stepped outside, Tiny and her siblings bounding around his feet, James couldn't help but look toward the road. Somewhere out there, Claire Harrison was searching. Sooner or later, their paths would cross. Until then, he'd do what he'd always done. Take care of what needed taking care of, and let tomorrow bring what it would. Claire sat in her temporary command center at the local Best Western, surrounded by laptops and search reports. Her tech background had taught her that data was everything. Every tip, Every sighting, every piece of surveillance footage could be the key. She'd been reviewing traffic cameras and security feeds for days, working outward from the crash site in an expanding grid. "Ms. Harrison." Rebecca entered with fresh coffee. The surveillance team found something. Claire's hands shook as she took the laptop her assistant offered. The footage was from a gas station security camera, dated the morning after the storm. The image was grainy but clear enough. A beaten-up pickup truck pulling in for fuel, and, in the passenger seat unmistakably, 5 golden retriever puppies. "Enhance the driver's side," Claire ordered, her heart racing. The tech team had already isolated the best frame, a tall man in work clothes, paying cash inside the store. His face was weathered but kind, his movements careful as he checked on the puppies before driving away. "We tracked the truck," Rebecca reported. "It belongs to James Miller. He owns a farm about 3 miles from where we crashed." She hesitated. "Ms. Harrison, he hasn't called about the reward." Claire studied the man's face on the screen. In the weeks since the accident, dozens of false claims had come in, people hoping to cash in on her desperation. But this man had her puppies and hadn't said a word. "What do we know about him?" Rebecca consulted her tablet. "Third-generation farmer, widowed 5 years ago. The bank is foreclosing on his property in less than 3 months. The reward money could save his farm twice over, but he hasn't called." Claire watched the footage again, the way he leaned into the truck, checking on the puppies, the gentle pat he gave one that stuck its head out the window. She opened another laptop, accessing the local property records. James Miller's farm appeared on the screen. 160 acres of prime agricultural land, now at risk of becoming another luxury development. She'd seen it happen countless times in her business dealings. Family farms swallowed up by progress, generations of history erased for profit. "Get me current photos of the farm," she ordered. Within minutes, satellite images appeared. Claire leaned closer, noting the carefully maintained fields, the old farmhouse, and there in the side yard, 5 distinctive golden shapes playing in the morning sun. Her throat tightened. "They're alive," she whispered. "They're safe." Rebecca was already reaching for her phone. "I'll call the police to—" "No," Claire's voice was firm. "No police, no media, no search teams. But Ms. Harrison, we've found them. We can handle this carefully." Claire stood, gathering her coat. "This man, he saved my puppies. He's been caring for them. He could have called about the reward at any time, but he didn't. That tells me something about his character." She studied the satellite image again, focusing on the farmhouse. It wasn't hard to imagine her puppies there, running free in the open space, being cared for by someone who valued them more than money. "Get me directions to the farm," she told Rebecca, "and then clear my schedule for the rest of the day." "You're going yourself?" Rebecca's concern was evident. "At least let me send security with you." Claire shook her head, still watching the footage of James Miller with her puppies. "No security, no entourage. This needs a personal touch." As her assistant left to get the directions, Claire touched the screen where her smallest puppy, Hope, was visible in the truck's window. The image was blurry, but she could swear the puppy looked happy, secure. She thought about James Miller, about his failing farm and the reward he hadn't claimed, about the kind of person who would wade into a flood to save animals he didn't. No, then care for them without seeking anything in return. "Well," she said softly to the image on her screen, "let's go meet the man who saved our family." James was brushing down his last cow when he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. He'd been expecting this moment since finding the newspaper, but his heart still skipped a beat at the sound. Through the barn door, he watched a sleek, black car pull up, nothing like the local vehicles that occasionally found their way to his farm. The woman who stepped out wasn't what he expected. No business suit, no entourage, just elegant simplicity in jeans and a cashmere sweater. She stood for a moment taking in the farm, and James recognized her from the newspaper photo. Claire Harrison, CEO of Harrison Technologies, looking both out of place and somehow right at home on his weathered gravel drive. Before he could step out to greet her, a chorus of familiar barks erupted from the farmhouse. 5 golden bundles of energy burst through the dog door he'd installed last week, racing across the yard toward their original owner. Claire Harrison dropped to her knees, heedless of the gravel as the puppies swarmed her. Her composed demeanor cracked, tears flowing freely as she gathered them close. "My babies," she whispered. "Oh, my precious babies." James hung back, watching the reunion. Tiny, or Hope, as he now knew was her real name, was covering Claire's face with enthusiastic kisses. The sight made his throat tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. Claire looked up, meeting his eyes across the yard. Without releasing the puppies, she pulled a small notepad and pen from her pocket, quickly writing something before standing. Still surrounded by excited puppies, she walked toward him, her steps deliberate but unhurried. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending her hand, "I believe I owe you more than I can ever repay." Her grip was firm, her eyes direct and warm. Up close, James could see the shadows of worry beneath her makeup, the relief in her smile. This wasn't the billionaire CEO from the papers. This was simply a woman who had found her lost family. "They're good dogs," he said simply. "They deserved a chance." She handed him the note she'd written. In elegant handwriting it read, "Thank you for saving not just their lives, but my heart. Some debts can't be paid with money." "I saw the newspaper," James admitted, "about the reward." "I know." Claire's eyes softened. "You didn't call." Around their feet, the puppies danced, unable to decide between their 2 favorite humans. Hope solved the dilemma by sitting firmly on James's boot, looking up at them both with complete contentment. "Would you—" Claire hesitated, then continued with quiet sincerity. "Would you tell me about the night you found them? About how you've been caring for them?" James looked at the note in his hand, then at the woman before him. Really looked at her. Past the wealth and status, he saw someone who understood what it meant to love something more than money or pride. "Would you like some coffee?" he offered. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." "I'd like that very much." They walked together toward the farmhouse, the puppies bounding around them. James noticed how Claire took in everything, the worn but well-maintained buildings, the fertile fields, the ancient oak trees Sarah lay beneath. Her eyes held neither judgment nor pity, just genuine interest. Inside, Martha regarded the newcomer from her perch with regal assessment before giving a slight nod of approval. Claire smiled at the cat, then took in the puppy beds, toys, and the small steps James had built so Hope could climb onto the couch more easily. "You've made them a home here," she said softly, running her fingers over Hope's favorite blanket. James poured 2 cups of coffee, buying time to steady his voice. "They made it a home again," he corrected. "Hadn't realized how quiet it was until they filled it up." Claire sat at his kitchen table, Hope in her lap, and her siblings sprawled at her feet. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the silver in her hair, warming her face. She looked, James thought, like she belonged there. "Tell me everything," she said, cradling her coffee cup. "Start with the storm." The morning stretched into afternoon, as James told Claire everything about the storm, the rescue, Tiny's illness, and the days that followed. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own stories about the puppies. Early weeks. Neither mentioned the reward. Finally, Claire set down her 3rd cup of coffee. "James, I've been thinking about your farm." He tensed slightly, expecting the conversation they'd been dancing around. But Claire surprised him. "What do you know about sustainable agriculture?" The question caught him off guard. "My grandmother was into organic farming before it had a fancy name. Taught me a lot about working with the land, not against it." Claire pulled a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. Inside was a preliminary contract, clearly drawn up that morning. "I have a proposition. Not charity," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "An investment." James opened the folder, scanning the contents. The legal language was complex, but the core concept was clear. Claire would provide capital to transform Miller Farm into a sustainable agriculture education center, combining traditional farming wisdom with modern technology. He would retain full ownership and operational control while sharing his knowledge with a new generation of farmers. "Why?" he asked finally, looking up from the papers. Claire reached down to scratch Hope's ears. "Because you could have called about the reward at any time. Because you built steps so a tiny puppy could reach the couch. Because this land clearly means more to you than money." She paused. "And because I've spent 20 years building technology to make people's lives better, but somewhere along the way, I lost touch with what that actually means." She stood, walking to the window that overlooked his fields. "This farm has potential, James. Not to become another soulless agribusiness, but to be something meaningful. A place where people can learn to balance progress with tradition." James joined her at the window, their shoulders nearly touching. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Farm's been struggling for years." "Good thing I like a challenge." Claire turned to face him. "I'm not offering to save your farm, James. I'm offering to help you transform it into something that can save others." The contract sat on the table behind them, Hope curled up beside it, as if giving her own approval. James thought about his grandmother's veterinary manual, about passing on knowledge that might otherwise be lost, about Sarah, who had always believed the farm could be more than just a farm. "I'd need time," he said slowly, "to look it over properly, get some advice." Claire nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. Take all the time you need." She hesitated, then added softly, "And James, whatever you decide about the farm, the puppies clearly love it here. Maybe we could discuss a shared custody arrangement." The suggestion hung in the air between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Before James could respond, Hope padded over and sat between them, looking up expectantly. "I think she's already decided," Claire said with a smile. James looked at the contract again, at the careful way it was structured to preserve his dignity, while offering real opportunity, at how it focused not on profits, but on creating something meaningful. "Would you like to see the rest of the farm?" he found himself asking. "There's a lot of potential you haven't seen yet." Claire's eyes lit up. "I'd like that very much." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, the puppies romping ahead, as James pointed out his ideas and Claire offered thoughtful suggestions. The contract waited on the kitchen table, Hope's paw prints visible on the corner, a reminder that sometimes the best business decisions come from the heart. 2 weeks after signing the contract, James and Claire stood over the architectural plans spread across his kitchen table. The morning sun streamed through windows that had been recently cleaned, casting light on detailed drawings that merged the old with the new. "The original barn structure stays," Claire was saying, tracing the lines with her finger. "We'll reinforce it but keep all the hand-hewn beams your grandfather cut. The new educational space will extend from the back, with glass walls overlooking the fields." She glanced at him. "What do you think?" James studied the plans, taking in how carefully they preserved the farm's character while creating something new. The puppies dozed in patches of sunlight, undisturbed by the sounds of work already beginning outside. Tommy had returned, along with a small crew, carefully repairing the fence lines. "Sarah would have loved this," he said quietly. Surprising. Himself. He hadn't spoken her name aloud to anyone in months, but somehow it felt right sharing it with Claire. Claire's hand found his arm, a gentle touch that conveyed understanding without pity. "Tell me about her vision for the farm." "She was a teacher," James said, looking out at the fields where organic seedlings were taking root. "Always said we should be teaching others, not just growing crops. Wanted to start programs for school kids, show them where their food comes from. Then we'll make sure there's a classroom garden," Claire decided, making a note on the plans. Something hands-on, the way Sarah would have wanted it. The sound of an approaching truck drew their attention. Dr. Chen pulled up, not in her usual veterinary vehicle, but in a pickup loaded with heritage apple saplings. The local community had caught wind of the farm's transformation, and support was flowing in unexpected ways. "My grandfather's orchard died out years ago," Dr. Chen called as she climbed down. "Been saving these cuttings. Thought they'd do well." Here in the educational garden, James watched as Tommy and the crew hurried to help unload the trees. Word had spread through the county. Miller Farm wasn't being sold to developers, but was becoming something new, something that honored its past while building toward the future. The agricultural college called, Claire mentioned, helping him stake out locations for the saplings. "They're interested in partnering with us. Your grandmother's organic farming techniques combined with modern sustainable practices, they see the potential." Hope, still tiny to James, pranced around them as they worked, occasionally bringing them sticks as her contribution to the renovation. Her siblings had appointed themselves supervisors of the project, monitoring different areas of the farm with wagging tails and curious eyes. By late afternoon, the new orchard was taking shape. James stood back, remembering summer. Days spent in his grandfather's orchard, learning the secrets of grafting and pruning. Now he would pass those lessons on to others. "Claire," he said, watching her chat easily with Dr. Chen about heritage fruit preservation, "thank you. Not just for the investment, but for understanding what this place means." She turned to him, her face flushed from the work, silver hair escaping its elegant twist. In that moment, she looked more alive than in any of her polished corporate photos. "You know, I started my company in a garage, with nothing but a dream and determination. This farm, it reminds me of those early days, when it was about creating something meaningful, not just profitable." The setting sun painted the renovations in soft gold, highlighting the blend of old and new. The worn brick of the original barn stood strong next to the fresh lumber of its extension. In the fields, modern irrigation systems would soon work, alongside traditional crop rotation methods. Hope settled between them, content in her role as project supervisor. Looking at the plans, at the work already underway, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And when Claire smiled at him over their shared vision, he suspected he wasn't the only one who felt that way. The kitchen, filled with warmth and the smell of baking bread, as James pulled his mother's old recipe book from the shelf. Claire sat at the counter, sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her cheek, looking utterly at home, despite the rustic surroundings. "My mother swore the secret was kneading the dough exactly 8 minutes, he explained, demonstrating the technique. "No more, no less. 8 minutes it is," Claire said, mimicking his movements with her own ball of dough. She'd arrived that morning in her usual elegant attire, but had immediately changed into borrowed overalls when James mentioned baking day, a monthly tradition he'd kept alive since his mother's passing. The puppies watched from their beds in the corner, heads tilted at the unfamiliar activity. Hope, ever the curious one, padded over to investigate the flour dusting the floor. "I haven't baked bread since college," Claire admitted, working the dough with surprising skill. "My roommate and I used to make terrible attempts at banana bread during finals week." "Hard to imagine you failing at anything," James teased gently. Claire laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "Oh, I've failed at plenty. My first company crashed spectacularly. My marriage lasted exactly 18 months. But bread," she held up her well-kneaded dough, "this, I'm determined to get right." Rebecca, Claire's assistant, chose that moment to appear in the doorway, tablet in hand. She stopped short at the sight of her impeccably professional boss, covered in flour, surrounded by puppies and the organized chaos of a country kitchen. "The board meeting," Rebecca started, then paused as Claire raised a flour-covered hand. "Can wait," Claire finished firmly. "I'm learning something important about proper bread technique." She turned to James. "Though perhaps we should document this momentous occasion." James found his old Polaroid camera, another family heirloom he couldn't bear to part with. Claire moved closer to him, holding up her dough while he held his. The puppies, sensing something interesting, crowded around their feet. Martha the cat positioned herself regally in the background. The camera clicked, whirred, and produced a photo that captured everything about the moment. The afternoon, light streaming through windows, the shared smiles, the happy dogs, the comfortable mess of their baking endeavor. Claire took the photo, studying it with an expression James couldn't quite read. "You know," she said softly, "I have thousands of photos from business events, charity galas, corporate achievements, but I can't remember the last time I was in a picture that felt this real." The bread finished baking as the sun began to set. They sat at the kitchen table, enjoying thick slices with fresh butter and honey from local bees. Rebecca had long since departed, having extracted a promise from Claire to call into the board meeting the next day. "Not bad for a tech CEO," James said, sampling Claire's loaf. "Though maybe don't quit your day job just yet." She kicked him playfully under the table. "I'll have you know I'm a very quick learner. Next time will be perfect." The words "next time" hung in the air between them, full of promise. The photo sat propped against the window, already claiming its place among the farm's memories. "You should go," Claire said eventually, though she made no move to leave. "Early meeting tomorrow." James walked her to her car, the puppies trailing behind them. The evening air was cool, crickets beginning their nightly chorus. At the car, Claire turned to him, flour still smudged on her cheek. Without thinking, James reached out and gently brushed it away. The touch lingered, neither of them pulling back immediately. Hope broke the moment by wiggling between them, demanding attention. Claire laughed, kneeling to give each puppy a proper goodbye. "Take care of him," she whispered to them, though not quietly enough that James couldn't hear. As her car disappeared down the driveway, James touched the photo in his pocket. A simple moment, captured forever. 2 people, 5 dogs, and a fed cat, making something new together. Not just bread, he realized, but perhaps something far more meaningful. Back in the kitchen, he found Claire had left her apron hanging next to his. The sight made his heart twist in a way that both scared and excited him. The puppies settled into their beds, tired from their day of supervising baking activities, while Martha watched him with knowing eyes. "Don't say it," he told the cat. But he was smiling as he began cleaning up, already looking forward to their next baking lesson. The tabloid arrived with the morning mail, its garish headline screaming across the front page: "Billionaire's secret romance, tech titan Claire Harrison's rural love nest." Below it were grainy photos, Claire in her borrowed overalls working in the garden, James teaching her to drive the tractor, their shared laughter over an outdoor lunch. James found it when he went to check the mailbox, his stomach turning as he read the sensationalized story. The article painted him as a calculating fortune hunter who had deliberately kept the puppies to lure Claire in, describing the farm renovation as his scheme to access her wealth. He was still standing by the mailbox when Claire's car appeared, moving faster than usual up the drive. She jumped out before it fully stopped, waving her own copy of the tabloid. "James, I'm so sorry," she began, but he cut her off by wordlessly handing her his morning mail. On top of the tabloid was a letter from the bank, cancelling their meeting about restructuring his loans. The reason cited was concerns about recent media attention and potential conflicts of interest. "They think I'm trying to scam you," he said flatly, "that this whole thing, the farm, the puppies, everything, is some kind of gold-digging scheme." The puppies bounded out to greet them, oblivious to the tension. Hope pressed against James's leg, sensing his distress. "We can fix this," Claire said firmly. "I'll call the bank myself. My legal team can—" "Your legal team?" James's voice was quiet, like they handled the photos of us, creating a no-comment statement that basically confirms there's something to comment on. Claire flinched. "I was trying to protect your privacy. If I denied everything, they'd just dig deeper." "Protect me?" "Claire, that article just destroyed what little professional credibility I had left in this community. The bank sees me as a liability now. The agricultural college will probably pull out of the partnership. Everything we've been building here is still worth building," she interrupted. "James, look at me. You know none of what they wrote is true. The people who matter know that too. But he was already retreating emotionally, his walls rising. Do they? Because from the outside it looks pretty damning. Man about to lose his farm suddenly gets involved with a wealthy woman, gets a massive investment, a fresh start, a chance to create something meaningful, Claire cut in. Something real. The word real hung between them, reminiscent of their conversation over the kitchen photo. But now it felt tainted, questioned. James looked around at his farm. Their project, seeing it through the tabloid's cynical lens. The renovations that had felt like progress now seemed like evidence of manipulation. The easy comfort they'd developed felt suddenly complicated. Maybe we should take a step back, he said finally. Let things cool down. Give your PR team time. No, Claire's voice was sharp. I've spent my entire life managing public perception, calculating every move. I won't let them turn this into another corporate strategy. She moved closer, reaching for his hand, but James stepped back. Hope whined softly at the tension between her two favorite humans. I need time to think, James said, to figure out how to fix this my way. Claire's face showed hurt before her professional mask slipped back into place. Of course, I understand. She knelt to hug each puppy goodbye, lingering with hope. When she stood, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Just don't decide anything without talking to me first, please. James nodded stiffly, unable to trust his voice. He watched her drive away, the tabloid crumpled in his fist, its ugly headlines mocking everything pure and genuine that had been growing between them. The puppies pressed close, offering comfort. Martha appeared on the porch railing, her green eyes full of feline judgment. The morning sun caught the windows of the half-finished education center, making them shine with promise or accusation, depending on how you looked at it. James thought of the kitchen photo, still displayed on his windowsill. It showed everything the tabloid couldn't understand, two people discovering something real in a world of carefully managed appearances. But now that reality had collided with the outside world, and he wasn't sure if their fragile connection was strong enough to survive the impact. A week of silence stretched between them like a chasm. The farm renovation continued, but through intermediaries, architects sending emails, contractors checking in with Rebecca. James threw himself into physical labor, working alongside Tommy, from dawn to dusk, trying to exhaust himself enough that he wouldn't lie awake thinking about Claire. The puppies felt the absence keenly. Hope spent hours watching the driveway, perking up at every passing car, while her siblings moped around the house. Even Martha seemed subdued, as if the farm itself was holding its breath. When Claire finally appeared, it was on a grey morning that threatened rain. She stepped out of her car, looking perfect and polished in her corporate armor, nothing like the flower-covered woman who had laughed in his kitchen. "The board is concerned," she said without preamble, her CEO mask firmly in place. "They think this project is becoming complicated." James leaned against the porch railing, keeping physical distance between them. "Complicated," he repeated flatly. "You mean I'm becoming complicated? The media attention is affecting stock prices. Our conservative investors are nervous about the company's image." She pulled out a folder. Not their original contract, with its hopeful plans, but something new and official looking. "My legal team has drafted a way to protect everyone's interests. The new agreement would create distance. Claire's investment managed through a separate foundation, their interaction limited to quarterly reviews. Professional, proper, safe." James took the papers, scanning terms that would effectively end everything genuine between them. "This isn't about the investors, Claire. This is about you getting scared." "Scared?" Her professional veneer cracked slightly. "I'm trying to save what we built here." "No, you're trying to control it, package it into something safe and corporate and meaningless." Anger and hurt made his voice sharp. "Tell me something. Was any of this real, or was I just your chance? To play farmer, to pretend you could step out of your tower and live in the real world?" Claire recoiled as if he'd slapped her. How dare you? I trusted you. I let you see parts of me nobody else. Let me? Like it was some kind of corporate strategy, some calculated risk? He was being cruel, he knew it, but couldn't seem to stop. Maybe those tabloids weren't so wrong after all. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd gone too far. Claire's face went completely still, all emotion locked away behind her professional mask. I see. Her voice was winter cold. Well then, I'll have Rebecca send the final paperwork. She turned to leave, then stopped. The puppies, they're yours. Always were. The words felt like gravel in his throat. Claire nodded once, sharply. I'll send someone to collect them tomorrow. James looked down at the new agreement in his hands. With deliberate slowness, he tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the porch floor. No need for paperwork. I'm withdrawing from the project entirely. Hope chose that moment to appear, squeezing through the screen door to plant herself. Between them, she looked from one to the other, whining softly, unable to understand why her humans wouldn't look at each other. Hope, Claire called softly, her voice finally cracking. Come. But the little dog didn't move from James's side. Her siblings appeared behind her, all 5 puppies forming a line between their humans, as if trying to bridge the growing divide. Thunder rumbled overhead, another storm approaching. Claire lifted her chin, visibly gathering her corporate armor around her like a shield. Right. Well, I'll send someone for them in the morning. She turned and walked to her car, her steps precise and measured. Only someone who knew her well would notice the slight tremor in her shoulders, the way her hands shook as she opened the car door. James watched her drive away through vision that definitely wasn't blurred by tears. Hope pressed against his leg, and he knelt to gather all 5 puppies close. I'm sorry, he whispered into their fur. I'm so sorry. The torn agreement lay scattered on the porch, the rain beginning to blur its careful legal language. Inside the house, the kitchen window still held their photograph, a moment of pure joy now turned bitter with regret. Thunder crashed again, closer now. The puppies huddled closer, and James realized with savage irony that their story had begun in a storm. Now, it seemed, another storm would end it. James spent a sleepless night watching the storm rage. The puppies huddled close, sensing his distress. Every time lightning flashed, he thought of that first night, wading into dangerous waters to save 5 little lives. It felt like a lifetime ago. Dawn brought a temporary break in the rain and a surprise on his porch. A rain-spotted envelope with his name written in Claire's elegant hand. Inside was a letter, the ink slightly smeared from raindrops but still legible. Dear James, I've spent my life building walls to protect myself, every decision calculated, every risk measured. Then you waded into a flood to save puppies you didn't know, asking nothing in return. You showed me what real courage looks like. Not the kind that builds empires, but the kind that opens hearts. I came to your farm looking for my puppies, and found something I didn't know I was missing: authenticity. You never once treated me like a CEO or a billionaire. You taught me to bake bread, to drive a tractor, to trust in something bigger than profit margins and stock prices. When the media attacked, I fell back on old habits. Control, distance, corporate solutions to human problems. I tried to protect what we were building by turning it into something safe and sterile. In doing so, I betrayed everything that made it special. You were right. I was scared, not of the publicity or the stock prices, but of how much this place, these puppies, and most of all, you, have come to mean to me. I'm writing this from my penthouse, surrounded by everything I've spent my life achieving. It all feels hollow now. I keep thinking about that photo in your kitchen window, about the way Hope still runs to check every car, hoping it's me, about the look in your eyes when you taught me your mother's bread recipe. I don't want to send someone to collect the puppies. I don't want quarterly reviews and corporate distance. I want early mornings watching the sun rise over your fields. I want flour on my clothes and dirt under my nails. I want real. If you're willing to talk, I'll be at the oak tree by the creek at sunrise. No lawyers, no contracts. Just us. Claire. James read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding. Outside, the storm had picked up again, rain drumming against the roof. Hope pressed her wet nose into his hand, her eyes wise and knowing. The kitchen window caught his eye, specifically the photo still displayed there. Through the glass, rain blurred and dim in the stormlight, he could see their shared joy. Captured in that simple moment, his grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us right back. He picked up his phone, staring at Claire's number. Pride warred with longing. Hurt battled hope. The puppies watched him expectantly, as if they knew this moment would determine not just their future, but his. Finally, his fingers moved across the keys. The creak's flooding. Meet me in the barn instead. It's where this all started anyway. Her response came almost immediately. On my way. James looked at his rain-soaked reflection in the window. He thought about walls and courage, about calculated risks and leap-of-faith trust, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your heart. Come on, he told the puppies, grabbing his coat. Let's go wait for her. The letter he tucked carefully into his pocket, protecting it from the rain. Some things, he was learning, were worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth taking risks to save. Thunder rolled overhead as he stepped onto the porch. But this time, the storm didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a beginning. The barn door creaked open, letting in a shaft of storm-grey light. Claire stood there, drenched from the rain, her usual perfect appearance surrendered to the elements. No corporate armor, no calculated facade, just a woman who had driven through a storm to reach this moment. James stepped forward from where he'd been waiting, the puppies rushing past him to greet her. Hope led the charge, leaping into Claire's arms with a joyful whimper. "I'm sorry," they both said at once, then laughed, breaking the tension. "You first," Claire said, setting Hope down but keeping one hand buried in the puppy's fur, as if drawing strength from the contact. "I let pride and fear talk me into pushing away the best thing that's happened to this farm, to me in years." James moved closer, close enough to see the rain droplets clinging to her silver hair. "I was so worried about what people thought. I was taking from you, I forgot about what we were building together. And I tried to solve a matter of the heart with corporate tactics." Claire's free hand reached out, hesitating just short of touching him. "I've spent so long being Claire Harrison, CEO, I almost forgot how to just be Claire." Their eyes met in the dim barn light, the storm rumbling overhead. Around them, the puppies created a circle of warmth and hope, their tails wagging in unanimous approval. "I like just Claire better," James said softly, finally closing the distance between them. "She makes terrible bread but has a perfect heart." Claire laughed through tears, her hand finding his. "And I like the James who saves puppies and teaches billionaires to drive tractors." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the rain, and holding hands like teenagers until Hope nudged them impatiently. "I think," Claire said, looking around the barn with fresh eyes, "we've been thinking too small about this place." She led him to the barn door, gesturing at the farm beyond. Not just an education center, but a community hub, a place where people can reconnect with the land, with tradition, with each other. The rain was easing, and in the growing light, James could see her vision. The old barn wouldn't just be a classroom, it would be a gathering place, a bridge between past and future. 3 months later, that vision took shape in the form of a bright poster tacked to the newly restored barn door. Miller Farm Harvest Festival, celebrating community, heritage, and hope. The farm had transformed. The education center was complete, its modern lines blending seamlessly with the historic barn. Heritage apple trees from Dr. Chen were bearing their first fruit. Tommy had been promoted to lead instructor for the youth farming program. But the real transformation was evident in the crowds of people now filling the farmyard. Local families picked apples in the new orchard. Children laughed in the teaching garden, proudly showing off their first harvests. Farmers young and old shared knowledge in the workshop spaces. Claire stood at James's side, watching it all with shining eyes. She wore overalls now more often than business suits, though she still ran her company, just with a different perspective, one rooted in real-world impact rather than just profit. "Look what you built," James said, squeezing her hand. "Look what we built," she corrected. "All of us." She nodded toward where the puppies, now nearly grown, were entertaining a group of children. Hope, still the smallest but the boldest, was teaching the kids her favorite trick, offering her paw to shake, just as she had done that first morning in the storm. The festival poster caught the autumn sunlight, its words becoming a promise. "Where every seed planted grows more than crops, it grows community." Dr. Chen approached them, carrying a blue ribbon. "The Heritage Apple Pie Contest needs its judges," she announced with a smile. "Though I warn you, my grandmother's recipe is unbeatable." "I don't know about that," Claire said with a playful glint in her eye. "James's mother's recipe might give it some competition." As they followed Dr. Chen to the contest area, James caught sight of their reflection in the barn's new windows. Claire's head rested easily on his shoulder, their steps in perfect sync. Behind them, the puppies followed, Hope leading her siblings in a happy parade. They looked, he realized, exactly like the family they had become, one built not by design or contract, but by choice, trust, and love. The poster fluttered in the autumn breeze, a symbol of everything they'd created together, a place where business met compassion, where progress honored tradition, and where two people who started as strangers had found their way home. 1 year to the day after the storm that started everything, James and Claire stood before the farm's new entrance. The morning sun caught the freshly painted sign, "Miller Farm, where hope grows." Beneath the main text, smaller letters read, "A center for community, education, and sustainable agriculture." "What do you think?" Claire asked, tilting her head to study their work. The design team suggested something more corporate, but this felt right. "It's perfect," James said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Simple, true." Hope, still tiny to James despite being fully grown, sat between them, her tail sweeping the ground proudly. Her siblings sprawled in the morning sun nearby, official greeters for the steady stream of visitors the farm now welcomed. The sign represented more than just a name change. It was a statement of everything they'd built together over the past year. The education center was thriving, booked, solid with school groups and aspiring farmers. The sustainable agriculture programs had gained national attention, with universities seeking to replicate their model. But more importantly, the farm had become a heart for the community. Local families gathered for seasonal celebrations. Children learned where their food came from. Elderly farmers shared their wisdom with a new generation. The very things Sarah had dreamed of, now made real. Claire's corporate life had transformed too. She still led Harrison Technologies, but with a new focus on sustainable agriculture innovations. The company's latest project, developed in partnership with the farm, was a series of affordable tools for small-scale farmers. "Did you ever imagine," Claire mused, "that night in the storm, that saving 5 puppies would lead to all this?" James thought back to that desperate night, to the way Hope had trusted him instantly, to the first time he saw Claire standing in his driveway. Sometimes the best things in life come from not imagining, just doing what feels right. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Tommy was leading today's group of student farmers, their eager faces pressed against bus windows. Behind them came Dr. Chen's truck, loaded with new saplings for the expanding orchard. "Speaking of doing what feels right," Claire said, turning to face him, "I've been thinking about the farmhouse." James raised an eyebrow. The old house was the one part of the farm they hadn't modernized, though Claire had been spending more nights there than at her penthouse lately. "The commute is getting tiresome," she continued, trying to sound casual but not quite managing it, "and this place needs a full-time leadership team. So I thought maybe it's time to make it official." James finished, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." Claire's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee, Hope immediately moving to sit beside him, as if they'd rehearsed it. In a way they had. James had practiced this moment with the Puppies as his audience more times than he'd admit. "Claire Harrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came here looking for lost puppies and found a broken-down farmer instead. You could have simply taken them back to your perfect life, but you chose to stay, to build something real. With me, would you consider building one more thing together? A life here with all of us?" Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks as she nodded, pulling him up into a kiss. The puppies erupted in joyful barks, drawing attention from the arriving visitors. Tommy led a cheer from the student bus, and Dr. Chen honked her horn in celebration. Later that evening, after the day's activities had wound down, they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. The puppies dozed at their feet, while Martha supervised from her railing. Claire's head rested on James's shoulder, her engagement ring catching the last rays of sunlight. "You know," she said softly, "most people would say this whole story is impossible. A billionaire and a farmer brought together by a storm and some puppies? Most people," James replied, "have forgotten that the best things in life can't be measured in dollars or logic." He gestured at their family, 5 dogs, 1 cat, and 2 people who had found each other against all odds. "This is worth more than any fortune." The new sign stood proud at the farm's entrance, a beacon in the growing dusk. "Where hope grows," not just the name of their farm now, but the story of their love. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness, and the biggest dreams grow from the smallest moments of courage. Hope lifted her head to look at them, her expression somehow both wise and mischievous, as if she'd known all along this was exactly where they'd end up. After all, she'd helped write their story, one paw print, one heart, one leap of faith at a time.